everybody is, but sorry, I'm just going to open it up so I can see the slide. You'll see that we were a team of 5 and a very passionate team. Everybody really got into this subject. And as you can see, we've indicated our titles and our areas of interest along the bottom because we have a life outside of the SFI. So it was a really great group that brought together diverse experiences, and we feel that it made our work a lot richer. So if we want to just, Andrea, just open the slide to the full GigaMap, and then I'll just do a quick overview, and then we'll get started with Hannah. So this is the picture of our entire GigaMap. We're going to zoom in on those areas, but we wanted you to see the artifact is set up as a Google document. We're going to start today with Hannah, who's going to give us an overview of how we're going to look through the information and then bring you along the left side in the problem space. Then Andrea is going to take a look and a deep dive into the center of these systems loops and story loops, so we can understand better, what are all the players involved. So she'll be zooming into that, so don't be concerned if you can't see it right now very clearly. Umar is going to come in and give some context by using case stories to tell the story of how does it look in the real world. So he's got some interesting cases. And then Aisha is going to go into the future, looking at the 3 horizons, how we discovered during this process, and what were some of those intervention possibilities and leverage points. And then I'm going to end the session today with where we landed on how might we, all right, 4 key areas where we felt we might be able to make some change in the future. So I'll hand it off to Hannah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah. And yeah, just piggybacking off of what Sylvia said, the way that our synthesis map is formatted is that its current state on the left and the path forward on the right. So I'll go into what the current state is and what that problem is and the actors involved. And you can see, you probably have noticed, but it is in the format of Google, because Google is a key vehicle of information that everyone can relate to. So we'll be going through the systems of information dissemination. And then you'll see the branding is very alike to Google. So you'll see in that search bar some of the stuff that we are going to be tackling today, such as what is misinformation and why does it happen? What are the systems behind polarization, and what does the future of democracy look like? So capturing what the current state is and the actors and the motivations, we'll begin with traditional media, but just to set some context of what you might have experienced, lockdowns, protests, fake news in the last couple of years. And one cannot help but witness society today and wonder how it came to be. So we are living in one of the most polarizing times in history, and the COVID-19 pandemic has acted as a case study to understand how information has flowed and become distorted through various systems. So in this map, we analyze information dissemination systems such as traditional media, social media, public health experts, and government. So we demonstrate how narratives are amplified by the agendas of these systems in order to maintain power, money, and control through clicks, views, and votes. Our key questions that this map answers are what you would expect to see if you typed in these questions in your Google search, which we went over. So starting with the left side, we analyze the system's current key actors and their underlying agendas. So the traditional media, both print and broadcast, are driven by views, ratings, and subscriptions. To get eyes on their content, writers and commentators have incentivized or embellished headlines to exaggerate stories and to get more attention on them. So Nora Loretto and Justin Ling, who are pictured here, are investigative journalists that have publicized how narratives are shaped by powerful actors such as business leaders, oligarchs, governments, or funders. So on our side, we saw COVID-19 being reported maybe differently, information included or left out to form a narrative that aligns with stakeholders. The public struggles on what to believe as a result of these agendas, resulting to a fragmented sense of truth. So looking at this graph, you can see how public confidence was diminished greatly in 2021. People trust elected officials the least and medical experts the most, but confidence was lost in all of these agents, showing the uprise of skepticism and distrust in these systems. Moving on to social media. Social media is motivated similarly by getting users on platforms, maintaining their attention, and driving engagement. So through persuasive design methods like autoplay, which you might see on YouTube, infinite scrolling as seen on TikTok, recommended videos, which are seen on all of these platforms, companies are prioritizing your attention on their platform over your well-being. So the user is kept on the app and their attention is used for profit, also known as the attention economy. When attention is the mark for profit, social media companies are not worried whether the information circulated is true or false. In fact, an MIT study found that fake news spreads 6 times faster than true news. In the graph below, we can see retweets are much more common than sharing the original post, which prioritizes engagement over sourceable truth. Tristan Harris, who's shown here, was a design ethicist for Google. Now he is the founder of the Center for Humane Technology. And his work was a cornerstone for us to realize how user engagement in social media leads to more power for the platform and also acts as tools to facilitate rapid spread of misinformation, which increases polarization. Next, we have experts. So experts in COVID and other topics are driven to be seen as credible sources. So that's their motivation. So some experts we looked into were Dr. Fauci and Theresa Tam, who have both been key medical experts in the pandemic and who have both provided medical expertise in conjunction with governmental policies such as mandates and lockdowns. So experts tend to create and shape data to provide insights and help shape discourse, but they could also fall victim and offer muzzled information or shape data that aligns with the narrative of their funders or those in power. The journey to become an expert in academia is accountable also to donors of the academic institutions. And finally, government. The government is divided between incumbent and opposition parties, each with their own methods to gain and maintain power. In recent times, incumbent and opposition parties have pushed to saying more polarizing statements to gain attention, go viral, and motivate their base to vote. So in this graph, we can see how trust in government has plummeted over the last 20 years. Research indicates that a polarized population increases voter turnout and sustains the power of the party, maintaining their agenda regardless of whether the information is true or false. In the information age that we are living in, we see these 4 actors disseminate agenda-led information, whether it is true or false. The availability of false information is harming our minds to be unable to discern what can be trusted or not. This is currently leading to the breakdown of our democracy because the public is no longer has the tools for civil debate as a result of the truth being so fragmented, and it diminishes our ability to move forward as a nation. And last in this section, you'll see a little iceberg type of model. So this tool, represented as an iceberg, is categorized by 4 levels of increasing depth: litany, systemic causes, worldview and discourse, and myths. And this was used to generate questions that emerged from secondary research and other activities to support foresight and futures thinking. And now I'll pass it on to Andrea to talk about the reinforcing story loops of these systems.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to be talking about the interaction. So the interaction, the gigamap, this tells a story of the causal effects of these actors and their motivations at a macro level, which is at the center, the meso in the middle, and then the micro is the square on the outer boundaries. So this paints a whole picture of how information is used as a through line and a narrative for actors to control public opinion in order to support their agendas, in order to gain money, power, and control. So in this map, we're answering, how did misinformation become so widespread? And experts have identified that there are 2 main themes. Those in power seek to maintain it, and those that are in power have no incentive to change it. So today I'll be navigating through each of these quadrants of the map by zooming in and chatting about the causal loops and the actors. But first I wanted to show you the map from a top-down perspective. So at a micro level, the squares here, the map illustrates how decisions are made and is affected from those in power in the center. It trickles down to the effects of the citizens. Here, the effects are amplified, and the perpetual cycle of social inequality and marginalization. It creates this pent-up frustration, anger, and tension that fuels citizens in their community to build their own safety nets of resources and networks. And at a macro level, polarization is the agenda as it increases attention and it fuels the economy that sways citizens towards a political agenda surrounding power, money, and control. So let's zoom into the experts. Okay, so at a macro level, in order for experts to gain control, they leverage speed of which information travels. This is in order to gain credibility for unique perspectives in research. And by withholding these methodologies, financial support will be attracted to the unique opinion of these expert views in order to line up to financial business agendas. And also to mention, experts are beholden to financial support in order to fund and further their research. And then at a micro level, by gatekeeping the resources, this decreases access to literacy. And in the case of COVID-19 is health literacy. The lack of clarity causes confusions and feelings of inequity. And so the lack of consistency of resources causes speculation and lowers compliance, therefore keeping marginalized communities in a cycle of knowledge oppression. So next, we're going to move into government. So in government, information is used as a tool to shape agendas on the political side. Experts work closely with the government to create policies that may be biased in order to gain control and influence for national and global reach. The opposing views then lead to decrease in party support, resulting in partisanship. So political leaders then further this by using polarizing and vitriolic statements to gain attention, go viral, increase financial support, and motivate their base to vote. And at a citizen level, this partisanship created by political parties creates mistrust. And with mistrust, the search for truth to sense make leads to citizens scrambling research together by connecting new narratives, which circulates conspiracy theories, and it leads to civil unrest and protests that perpetuate partisanship. Okay, then we're going to go into social media. So social media, it's a business model that is based on clicks and views. So the demand for more data and users stem from requests from the government, experts, and traditional media. Social media conglomerates, they leverage power by staying in control through the competitive advantage in collecting unique data of targeted and predictable behavior in order to sell, again, to organizations such as political parties to then further the goals of their agenda. So the consumers and citizens using social media as a platform, they're exposed to biased views based on how engineers are creating filtering and categorization to push more personalized content and increase attention, which then magnifies the citizens' confirmation bias. And then lastly, we have corporate media. So the corporate media gains control by dominating the narrative with the help of the unique opinions from experts as they're connected, and also with the assistance of social media to spread broadcasting agenda and narratives. And with more sensationalism, media is then escalated through viewership. So an editorial influence also might create a unique lens. For example, some journalists are graduates from academia, and they might hold a privileged and educated lens and biased view based on their positionality. So the retelling of these stories from journalists can actually create more speculation amongst citizens, which then furthers outrage and commentary, which leads to an increase of viewership, but also an engagement of the media brand. So let me just zoom out. So zooming out of this map, we've seen how information travels as a connector through government, academia, media, social platforms to help organizations maintain power, money, and control. And the effects of these actions create a division between the micro and the macro communities. By gatekeeping information, it leads to citizens assembling bits and pieces of information by themselves in order to process grief or traumatic experiences or unknown circumstances. So this is the creation of the misinformation micro loop. So next, I'm going to pass it over to Umar to discuss specific case studies relating to social media and corporate media causal loops.
Thanks, Andrea. So I'm going to share two case studies, one from a mainstream organization most of you have heard of, and one from a website I'm sure most of you have never heard of. In 2020, the New York Times ran not one, but two articles implicating the Russian government paying Taliban militants to target and attack American soldiers. The story insinuated the Trump government knew of the bounty and was therefore capitulating to the Russians. The Democrats began to call for another impeachment inquiry, and at that point, candidate Biden attacked Trump on the campaign trail as well. The story was circulated and retweeted by multiple news outlets, media personalities, and political action committees or PACs like the Lincoln Project. Once elected, the Biden administration assessed that the intelligence was on weak merit or moderate merit, a claim the Trump administration made as well when the report was initially released. So this is a great example of the story creation loop. It shows how stories with weak underlying certainty can circulate in mainstream media and build a narrative before they're dispelled. The second case study I want to talk about occurred during COVID and was from a little-known website called Great Game India. Great Game India released a story on how the COVID virus was manufactured in Winnipeg before being shipped to Wuhan, China for accidental release. This case study shows well the power of social media and malign actors as this no-name website story was reshared and retweeted by conspiracy websites and right-wing personalities. The website went from 1,600 views when the story was initially released to over 908,000 views in less than a few weeks, and hit a crescendo of 1.5 million views a day in March. The furor and the story got so much buzz, the Canadian government had to step in and debunk the theory themselves. The case study demonstrates the escalatory social media loop that utilizes your personal interests, as well as black box algorithms and echo chambers to magnify false stories, all for the sake of engagement. And now I'll pass it on to Aisha to talk about the future state.
Thank you, Umar. So Hannah, Andrea, and Umar have just given us a clear and thorough view of our current state. So now let's walk through our path forward. In order to envision our future state, we use the 3 horizons diagram to identify that ideal future and the steps needed to get there. For your reference, the blue line represents H1. That's the current state that we've just walked through quite thoroughly and robustly. The green line, H2, represents the disruptions of innovation. So that's both the captured disruptions that are holding the line for that current state, and as well the harnessed disruptions that are advancing us into H3, the ideal future state. So again, as we just heard, in our current state of H1, the government, tech, traditional media, and big businesses collude and intermingle to influence the policies that shape and exploit our everyday life. So let's discuss H2, the disruptions to innovation. Let's start with the captured disruptions that, as I said, essentially keep us in the H1, the current state. When a disruption is captured, the current state is essentially prolonged. We see it maintained. A clear example of captured disruption would be various forms of censorship that are enacted to control or maintain a specific narrative. This in turn supports distrust among people and keeps the government unresponsive as censorship rules and unwanted and unpopular opinions are dismissed and oppressed. Harness disruptions. So again, this is our H2 that's moving us into our desired future state. These disruptions are bringing to fruition and harnessing that ideal future state. Examples of this would include enabling individual and local journalism that drives pluralistic narratives. This would be proactive policy making, strong, clear, and enforced anti-corruption laws. These are the shifts towards a more autonomous, citizen empowered solutions. So now I'm going to touch on H3. So this is our ideal future state. This is essentially nourished into existence by adding, again, things like diversity, inclusion, and transparency. It's that clear pivot and movement away from exploitive and oppressive ways that information is generated and used. So ideally, social media isn't targeting us for our data. The government is responsive to citizens, and therefore trust is being established with our institutions. So as I've just described here, our future state is a drastic move away from the manipulative uses of information. It moves us away from exploitation and towards a stronger autonomy. Some of these examples are best explored in our intervention wheel. So while faced with this wicked problem of information becoming disinformation, we determined that our greatest leverage points to intervene are carefully human-centered solutions. They essentially amplify diverse local viewpoints in established media, and they enable diverse perspectives and positionalities. Another example would be, restricting the amount of ownership that governments can have in mainstream networks and allowing greater transparency of funding for established media. So I'm going to hand it over to Sylvia now.
Okay, thank you so much, Aisha. I'm just mindful of the time, Peter, so we'll go just quickly to take us kind of home for the night. If you want to move up a little, Andrea, so I can see the number 1 there. I just or scan out so I can see it. I can't see it on my screen.
Okay, and we've got up to 10 minutes with questions and things
Okay.
too.
Well, I just want to, just if you could, is it Andrea? Are you doing it? Are you moving the screen, Andrea?
Yeah.
Or, yeah, just so
is that okay?
Can you come down just so I can see the number 1 on my screen? Down, yeah, down. No.
Sorry.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And Sebastian, you mentioned in the chat you're a graphic artist, so you may appreciate we chose this visual image of an hourglass to represent, the how might we, right? Rebuild trust and battle information. And we looked at 4 buckets. And our hourglass represented for us the image of time. This is a very important wicked problem right now that needs attention right now. So we looked at the time. We also chose the hourglass because of the balance, right? So we felt that the societal intervention sort of from top down and individual bottom up should be equal and of importance. And there's a lot that sort of meets in the middle, we felt, to create the change that we're going to recommend. So we did use that image. So the first idea we had probably is the most obvious. It was separating the money from the information and decision making. So we follow the money and we see all the connection of our actors in government, big tech, business that are being funded, lobbied, and financed in ways that influence some of the decision making. So we look at some of the possible solutions there is transparency laws in elections and on fundraising. Some of removal of ads and social media to de-incentivize the sell and the promotion element. And also we looked at the open science and innovation, looking at where research is done, who funds that, and what topics are being researched. So in that area of removal of the money from the information decision making, those were the key areas. Move to number 2, which is more moving into societal, is looking at empowering voices. So shifting to a more human-centered approach, including ethnic, racial, ideological viewpoints for change, sort of power, bringing the power from the ground up. Aisha really did explain that very well. And 2 of the areas that we looked at is increased diversity in the boardroom, in broadcast studios, decision makers, and reporters, and also amplifying local journalism. You know, stories by the people in local areas. We read a lot about that in our research, and we discovered that also. The removal of the local story from the citizen really creates polarization. So that was our second area of intervention. And then the third in the blue box was increasing more transparency in technology and social media companies. So utilizing blockchain to track information generation and the attention economy with causal loops. So giving more tools to individuals so they can leave those echo chambers, to change the algorithms. They can reset those algorithms so they would be informed citizens, which would promote de-radicalization into the social media environment, empowering people to really be able to see who those bad actors are, or recognize the bad actors, and battle misinformation from the bottom up. And then finally, in our last area that we looked at was reducing polarization, again, at a grassroots level, using dialogue groups, citizens assemblies, perspective taking. You know, empathy is at the sort of the core of many of these things, but would foster superordinate goals. So media outlets would be incentivized to, you know, support some of these initiatives, creating a shift in social media from that side taking that seems to be prevalent in the social media ideology, and promoting the universal citizen. So the larger than self way of being, sort of what we see in war times. People come together as one. So those are our some of our possible interventions. We'll close down the map now. And thank you. I want to take some questions, but thank you for caring to listen to our work and our story. And we really do appreciate that you've stayed with us during this time. So any questions? Any of us we can take the questions if you want, or if you want to type in the chat, that'd be great too.
I don't know how to raise my hand, so I'm just going to blurt it out. I'm Joanne. I'm also from the SFI program. I just want to say thank you. It was such a pleasure to have you go through this. This is my second time seeing it, but previously it was pinched into a smaller time frame, so it was great to have you guys go through everything. I will say it does make me question sort of who gets to decide what the truth is. And I know that you kind of broke that down to the best of your ability for the timeline, but it is like a really curious thing, who gets to make those decisions. And it makes me question everything around me now.
So Joanne, we've given you a topic for your next dinner with the family.
I know, right?
Thank you for that, Joanne, and thank you for your kind words. Zaid, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you for, I'll lower my hand. Thank you for sharing the synthesis map. It's a wonderful piece. And I did, as an SFI grad, I also did my MRP related to media and information systems. So this one really resonates. And I guess it's not fully a question, it's more just a reflection. On the topic of public confidence in experts has declined. I always find that an interesting insight. So again, this isn't necessarily a question per se, but sometimes I wonder, because that often does get used to frame a certain conversations about the decline in experts, but sometimes I wonder, you know, the creative trick of flipping it as an opportunity about understanding is that is there a desire, is there a way to harness that insight towards actually greater accountability? Is there something wrong with the subject matter experts, not necessarily wrong with them, but wrong with how their fields are formed in relation to the media ecosystems that they interact with? And so the finger pointing is not necessarily to the people who have a declining trust in them, rather is to the calibration of that field and the media ecosystems that they interact with. And so it's more just a reflection that your synthesis map prompted, but it's something I've been thinking about more and more as you see those types of stats become more present.
And just as you're speaking, I'm thinking about who is the expert? Is it the face that tells the people about what the expert, or that filters the expert? And the other thing I thought about is health literacy. And maybe, my background is more in health, but thought about what you're saying is more on the people, is on the accountability of the experts to bring it in a way that is understood well by the citizens, right? Is that kind of what you were touching on at the end there?
Absolutely, yeah. And my communication background bias is showing here. It's kind of like, hey, experts, up your game, basically.
I don't even know that that's your bias, though, Zaid. When you look at how information is conveyed and how people receive it. So really appreciate your comments, and thank you so much for that. Any other comments? Sorry, I just answered that. Anybody from the team want to speak to that, or we could take another question? Anyone from my team that wanted to add to that? No. Okay. Anyone else have a question? We love to know what's on your mind as you listen. Anybody have a question or a comment for us? That would be great.
Might I make a comment or question? My video seems not to work. David Hawk here. Have you also thought about the more contextual issue that all of us have less confidence in each other as well as ourselves? So it's certainly not related to the professions and to the bits and pieces out there, but it's much more general, which begins to explain much of the hateful dialogue between people, and then late at night with ourselves. And so it's more general. And I've used this as part of a discourse on even though it's somewhat hateful, we recognize climate change is coming, and we recognize it's irreversible and there's very little we can do in spite of propaganda. And it's causing us to be, to react rather badly. Have you thought about that?
Do you think, oh no, I don't know if the rest of the group, I'll just as I sit here, I'm thinking the word comes to mind is incivility. When you're speaking, that's what I was thinking about. But what about the rest of the team? Any thoughts on David's comment?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is we actually took that perspective for the second class that we took in the semester, which was innovative research methods. And so the topic of incivility and how we conversate with each other after being targeted by misinformation and throughout the COVID pandemic was one we really looked at. There were general themes that arose. The one that comes to mind was the theme of intellectual shame. For example, like if somebody was potentially an anti-vaxxer or a vaccine skeptic, there was a level of like, do you know what you're talking about? Like, do you understand what you're saying? And a level of intellectual shame they had to overcome. And in many of our interviews, many of our participants began by, giving their who's who and resume before they actually shared their thoughts, so as to say, hey, listen, like I have an MBA or I'm a bachelor's in science. I'm not a dummy. I just don't necessarily trust what the experts are telling us and the way it's being received. So to both Zaid's point, as well as to the last comment, I think it was a very fascinating semester and a very fascinating time for us to try and tackle and analyze some of what's occurring.
And so much more, even right as you're speaking, Umar, to explore. Joanne, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Sylvia. I find this map absolutely comprehensive to describe how information disseminate or spread. My question is, so how does information dissemination affect or influence decision-making individually or at the organizational level. Because social sciences and psychological sciences have proven that individuals tend to make a decision based on the 5 to 10 people they're most associated with or in their close circle. For example, in the election, if all your friends are voting to one party, you tend to, or your family, you tend to vote like them. So how will this map, or have you ever thought about how this could help governments, experts, all the sources influence people's decision making?
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
I think one of our intervention, thank you so much, Joanne. That's a great question. One of our intervention points was to empower diverse voices. And I think that really works, like, for example, in a boardroom for, let's say, $1 trillion company like Apple. If everyone is thinking the same way and from the same place, you're going to get the same solutions, or, you're going to have that recycled sort of ideologies there. And I think the importance of diversity is not to just have people that look differently to us, but that think differently to us. And I think that's where that will combat a lot of like what has done before is going to continue, and it'll combat that. It'll intervene from that, and we'll get like diverse perspectives on problems from both race, but also from class, from age. There's so many other factors that are involved in diversity, from accessibility. There's so many things that there's so many reasons why diversity is not just something that's a nice to have, but definitely broadens our horizons on how we think.
And to add to Hannah's point, if we had shown you a historical perspective, which we didn't really go to voting and decision making, but Joanne, you asked about decision making. If we put a spotlight on the historical perspective of how people made decisions, more in the US model, we examined it, Democrat, Republican, in the history is about issues, right? Is looking at what are the common issues that I'm looking at, and is it aligned to my party? And we look at the differences now and where the party is the decision maker. So even if I agreed with something, but it then came out of another party's mouth, I disagree now. So the shift is, even if I feel strongly about climate and, but I hear it now from the voice of the Democrat that Republican, the shift is not caring about that issue. It lowers the issue. So it would be interesting to look at, just from a psychological perspective, decision making. How are people making decisions? What are those influence factors? Such a great question.
Thank you, Hannah and Sylvia.
Sylvia, just to make a slight footnote comment on what you said, which I like very much. We're working on a venture which is to try and bring some aspects of democracy to the USA, that, just at least test it and see if it might work, assuming it may not. And in regard to that, I'm trying in Iowa to get them to add to the bottom of the ballot, none of the above. And in 3 iterations, we calculated both parties are gone, because we do believe 50% of the voters would say none of the above, because there's no particular reason to vote for either party. And so then the issue is what happens when you've gotten rid of the above. How do you find candidates are truly democratic or not? And so I think you're onto the right thing. It's just, you might need to be a little more radical about experimenting with democracy or something else.
And David, what an interesting way to quickly put the power back to the people. What you're doing, right? Like that. You can click a box.
I've met with party leaders of both in Iowa, and they're adamant that we're not going to do this. That sounds like anarchy. And I'm actually an anarchist, so that's why I proposed it.
Well, David, you're going to have to let us know when Peter lets you show your systems map, because we want to join.